At the beginning of this century, there was no living European who had seen Lhasa, this forbidden city of Tibet. Foreigners were not welcome. Tibet was one of the last secret places on Earth, a mystery that the 19th century had left for the 20th to explore. It was their Buddhist religion the Tibetans wished to preserve from outside influences, this and their fragile independence. Like a no-man's land behind the Himalayas, Tibet kept apart three empires. To the south was British India. To the west, the expanding Russian Empire. To the east and north, Imperial China. The Chinese had always claimed Tibet to be part of China, a claim they had only rarely been able to enforce.
In late 1949, shortly after the communist takeover of China, the People's Liberation Army invaded Tibet. Tibet's tiny army was quickly defeated, and by the summer of 1951, Chinese troops were marching into the Tibetan capital, Lhasa. The 17-year-old Dalai Lama, Tibet's temporal and spiritual leader, was forced to come to terms with the Chinese. Throughout the 50s, Chinese troops poured into Tibet. In Lhasa, the Tibetan government maintained an uneasy coexistence with the Chinese, but in the outlying provinces, the Chinese began to impose communist reforms. In 1956, they began the destruction of monasteries in eastern Tibet.
In January 1959, the Chinese again asked the Dalai Lama to go to Peking. He declined, explaining that he had to take important religious examinations that month. Although he was already the ruler of Tibet, he still had to prove that his religious knowledge made him worthy of office. For 3 months, the Dalai Lama was to be questioned and examined in each of the 3 great monasteries of Lhasa. For him, it was the culmination of 18 years of study. At each monastery, a reception tent was put up to welcome the Dalai Lama. Monks queued for his blessings before he was escorted on up to the monastery. Cabinet meetings were held at the monasteries throughout the 3 months of the examinations. In all my years in Tibet, wrote Heinrich Harrer, I never met anyone who expressed the slightest doubt about Lord Buddha's teachings. It must have infuriated the Chinese communists, for whom all this religion was simply superstition, a tranquilizing poison used by capitalists to oppress the people, that even 10 years after their takeover of Tibet, religion still dominated what was supposed to be part of atheist China. The last stage of the Dalai Lama's examination took place in Lhasa in the Jokang, the central cathedral. By early 1959, the situation in Tibet was deteriorating fast. The guerrillas had grown so strong, they were able to overthrow a large Chinese garrison at Setang, not far from Lhasa, and there were repeated attacks on Chinese convoys. Tension was high, but nothing could interrupt the spiritual preoccupations of the Tibetan government. Shortly after the successful completion of his examination, early in March 1959, the Dalai Lama was invited to attend a display at the Chinese barracks in Lhasa. To the Tibetans, this was seen as a trap. They believed that the Chinese would seize the Dalai Lama. Thousands swarmed to the Norbalinka summer palace to protect him. It was the beginning of an uprising against the Chinese. A Chinese emissary was stoned to death. Campers from eastern Tibet took up defensive positions and were soon joined by Tibetan soldiers. The Tibetan people had taken matters into their own hands.
The rebel bandits proceed with their reckless preparations for war.
Unknown to the Chinese, the Dalai Lama had slipped away from Lhasa by night. The last Tibetan cabinet meeting had denounced all agreements with China on the grounds of persistent violations by China and had proclaimed Tibet independent.
Their patience finally exhausted, the military area command called an emergency meeting 7 hours after the outbreak of the revolt. They resolved to resolutely suppress the rebellion and safeguard the unity and territorial integrity of the motherland. 2 days later, the rebel units in Lhasa and its outskirts were completely crushed.
Peking's version of the Dalai Lama's escape was that the Dalai Lama had been abducted under duress by the rebels, a few reactionaries manipulated by foreign powers, acting against the will of the people.
Lhasa citizens participate in the work of clearing up the debris. Examples from real life teach these children the distinction between good people and bad people.
In India, the Dalai Lama was greeted by a tremendous popular demonstration of world concern and relief, and by an embarrassed Indian government. There were outstanding differences about the border between India and Tibet. Nehru was afraid of provoking the Chinese, who were by now firmly in control of Tibet.
Lhasa's 20,000 inhabitants hold a grand rally on the square before the Potala Palace. The five-starred red flag of our motherland flutters high over Lhasa.
The first of 90,000 Tibetan refugees followed the Dalai Lama across the Himalayas into India and Nepal. They told of the suppression of their religion and brutal treatment by the Chinese. India was not anxious to publicize the camps built to receive the refugees on the hot plains beneath the Himalayan foothills. The Chinese were making threatening charges about India harboring reactionaries. Nehru was dismayed and concerned. Unaccustomed to the heat and humidity of the plains, the refugees were found work constructing roads in the hills of northern India. In 1962, Indian border posts on the frontier were overrun by the Chinese. It was for Nehru the final disillusionment with the idea of peaceful coexistence with China. In India, the Dalai Lama was treated as an honored guest. He gratefully acknowledged the help that had been given to his people. For all the refugees, the Dalai Lama continued to provide a focus for their hopes and devotion. In exile, the refugees were held together by their religion and the presence, real and symbolic, of the Dalai Lama. Under the Chinese, Tibet was as much a mystery as it had ever been. Few journalists were allowed into the country, and those who were permitted had usually shown themselves to have been sympathetic to the Chinese.
The people of Tibet, like their leader, the Dalai Lama, were well known as peace-loving, non-violent followers of Buddhism. What is less known is that thousands of Tibetans fought a long and bloody guerrilla war against the invading forces of Communist China. These men are the forgotten survivors of the Tibetan resistance that from 1956 to 1974 took up arms against the Chinese. For much of this period, their closest ally was the CIA, which helped to train and arm them. I was convinced that you were planning to destroy all the lamas and monks of Tibet. So much change. But was by opposing God, and in the process whether I died a violent death or a non-violent one. Anyway, one has to die. He didn't. I felt that it would be more worthwhile to make the supreme sacrifice and give up my life.
Well, but basically, as a Buddhist, believe if motivation is good and the goal is good, then method, even as a apparently violent kind, is Buddhism. Good Buddhism. But then, in our situation, in our case, so whether it is practical or not, that's the big question.
The attack on their monasteries proved to be the last straw. The Karmic tribes in eastern Tibet were revolted. In Lhasa, a group of Kamba traders led by Andrew Gompa formed an underground organization. They sent their representatives to India to muster support from outside countries. In India, the Dalai Lama's elder brother, who was living in exile, came to see them.
He told us that he was happy that we had made it to India. He said he had heard of our resistance efforts in eastern Tibet and that we had come to India because we were trying to do something for our country. He said, I'm in touch with America and I will talk to them about this.
They start sending their messages. And what they're asking arms. And I don't have arms. But then I introduced what you call Americans, so the direct for the tantra with the Tibetans, and then communities, what you call so-called American participating, training, and recruiting, and sending the Tibetans to the United States for training and this and that. Start like that way.
In 1956, the CIA got actively involved in Tibet. Four Camp Hale trainees were also parachuted in, and about 20 more came overland. Training began in earnest, and the guerrillas were organized along the lines of a modern army. From now on, the Mustang resistance force would be funded by the CIA. The commander of Mustang was Baba Yishi, a former monk and resistance leader.
We should have been happy to receive the arms, but in fact I was sad. As soon as we received the aid, the Americans started scolding us like children. They told us that we had to go into Tibet immediately. Although we were able to get a lot of intelligence, the Americans wouldn't believe us. They told us that it was useless. They needed proof. If we killed any Chinese, we had to send them their identification numbers. And if we destroyed vehicles, they wanted their registration numbers. They told us our information was useless without evidence. They really scolded us, my word. Sometimes I wish they hadn't sent us the arms at all.
The Mustang force continued its operations until early 1969, when the CIA abruptly announced that it was cutting off all support to the resistance. America's foreign policy objectives had changed.
It was a different era. I think he pulled out of Mustang because of basically the operational utility was no longer there. It was pulling out of support for His Holiness, and it was, we were starting a rapprochement with China. And it was a new, if not made at direct Chinese request, it was the U.S. relations with Tibet were something that would be certainly considered by that time to be somewhat of an impediment to relations, to the close relationship that the government was trying to initiate with Beijing.
The CIA told me, and the Chinese government made a condition to enable for United States to establish diplomatic relations with China. They made a condition, two conditions. One, United States must cut off their diplomatic relationship with Republic of China. Taiwan. Second, United States must cut off all the connections and all assistance for the Tibetans, including Mustang. But then politics are politics. You never know. Sooner or later they're going to betray you. Because Americans are giving me verbal assurances saying if Dalai Lama comes to India, they will support for India's Tibetan independence until Tibet regain independence.
The survivors of the Mustang resistance force lived together in 2 refugee settlements in Nepal. Here they eke out a living spinning wool and weaving carpets. In 1974, the Nepalese government, under pressure from China, sent troops to Mustang to demand the surrender of the guerrillas. Fearing a bloody confrontation, the Dalai Lama himself intervened.
I was told they decide if Nepalese officials come to their place and take arms, then they decide to fight. So that's very serious. I think the few hundred Tibetan can stop. There's some Nepalese people there for a few months. But what use? And then several thousand Tibetans in Nepal, they will suffer. So therefore, there's no other alternative except my direct sort of involvement. Then I said the message.
It contained his real voice. So when the Dalai Lama's message came, some of the men even cried, I swear. Everyone heard the message with their own ears, so we had no choice but to surrender. Then we turned in our weapons all day and all night.
Then one of our leaders, Genpache, said, "It is better for me to die than to surrender my weapons." Even so, he did give them up. But afterwards, he cut his own throat with a dagger and killed himself right there. Another soldier, Sewan Gepo, drowned himself. 4 or 5 others also threw themselves in the river and killed themselves.
40 years after the guerrillas first took up arms, their goal of a free Tibet is still a dream. Their homeland remains firmly under Chinese control.
You've been in exile since 1959.
Right.
Help me with something, because time flies and we forget. Why did China exile you?
Oh, that's a long history.
Don't go that long. Just give me simply.
Oh, simple. The Chinese forces came to Tibet in the name of liberation, liberate from very dark, dark, backward, and feudal. So in principle, that's good. Then, you see, they try to control every Tibetan life, including our education, our spirituality. Then they, you see, instead of listen or instead of sort of investigate on the spot, they simply, you see, impose their belief and backed by force. Then things become worse and worse and worse. So 1954 autumn, I went to Peking. I have several times meeting with Chairman Mao Zedong. At that time, I really developed great hope and confidence. We can work under the leadership of Chairman Mao Zedong, and actually I may share one of sort of my view. As far as socio-economic theory is concerned, I'm Marxist. Still I'm Marxist.
You are a Marxist.
so dangerous person in the capitalist country. So I really, you see, admire the concept of socialism. But then, eventually, in China proper, you see, then things become very difficult. Totalitarian sort of suppression. And Tibet also.
They exiled you in 59.
Then 1958, 59, things become out of control. Then there is no other option except escape. So.
And you've never been back?
No.
Help me with something, because time flies and we forget.
The emptiness doctrine originated from the Heart Sutra. In the Heart Sutra on Vulture's Peak, a bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, transcends to a new level of understanding of the Dharma and proceeds to say that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. There is no samsara, no nirvana, no enlightenment, no defilements, no eye awareness, no sound awareness, no senses. I mean, I apologize, I don't have the full sutra memorized. At the end of this pronouncement by Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha says something along the lines of well said. So you have to translate this, or try to translate this, into the Christian context. So you have to imagine Jesus, one of his apostles, and Archangel Gabriel. And the Archangel says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. There is no God, there is no Son of God, there is no Holy Spirit. There is no soul, there is no sin. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. Well, if this was said, and if this part of the New Testament was then chanted and repeated every time during the Mass, Christianity would have a different feel to it. So the bad part of this was that this was a pretty shitty recitation of the Heart Sutra. As bad as you get, kind of a half-assed recitation. But the good thing is that I'm at work right now, like I'm technically working. I'm on call. And yet I get paid to recite the Heart Sutra horribly from my YouTube channel. So in that, it's just depending on, I guess, the relative of the ultimate truth. So the Heart Sutra is really the heart of the division between the Theravadan school and the Mahayana school. So the Theravadan school is preserved in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Laos, and I'm sure I've left something out. And the Mahayana school that accepts these Sanskrit sutras is presented, of course, in Tibet, in China, in Japan, in Mongolia, and elsewhere.
This is the story of a Buddhist monk buried in 1927 who remains to this day mysteriously suspended between life and death. It begins when Dasha Dorzo Itigilov, leader of Russia's Buddhists, or Pandito Hambo Lama, gathered his followers to announce his death. He predicted the coming terror under Stalin, warned them to flee, and said he'd return in 75 years. Then, in a deep meditation, he passed away. The Humbo Lama was buried as he died in the upright lotus position. 2 years later, Stalin's purges began. Monasteries were burned, the lamas who hadn't fled were killed or sent to labor camps. Buddhism in Russia was all but wiped out. Itigilov's body, meanwhile, was exhumed briefly twice. Packed in a box with salt, it was found to be perfectly preserved, the limbs flexible, the skin elastic. Finally, in 2002, the current Humbo Lama put the body on display to help the Buddhist revival. 75 years after his death, and just as he'd promised, Itigilov had returned. Housed in the temple's top room, the monks reluctantly allowed me to see and touch the body, but not to film it. It had a musty smell, the skin waxy and moist. Scientists who've examined hair, skin and nail samples agree the body's protein structure matches that of a living person. The monks here testify that when the skin is broken, a reddish jelly oozes out. There is no evidence of embalming or the use of any chemical technique. Buddhists believe that through meditation, Itigilov entered a state of so-called ultimate reality. Scientists call it anabiosis, or suspended animation. On this, science and religion appear to agree. Pandito Humbo Lama isn't alive, of course, but nor is he entirely dead. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Buryatia.
I will return to this question of these divisions between Mahayana and Theravadan, but for now I want to focus on something else, and that is the division between philosophical Buddhism and traditional Buddhism. Now, philosophical Buddhism is not a traditional category, it is just something that has emerged right now. In modernity, there is a move for what has been called Protestant Buddhism. Protestant Buddhism, much like Protestant Christianity, is trying to return to the basics of the Buddhist teachings and not be distracted by ritual and prayer, etc., just going back to the core. And I very much welcome it. And as it's going back to the core, I actually don't believe in getting rid of those other things like ritual. I think that they're meaningful, but they lose their meaning if the underlying philosophy is abandoned. And as a part of that movement, there is also a new reality of just educated people in the West and elsewhere interested in Buddhist philosophy. And these are the people who don't accept premises like reincarnation and the more metaphysical beliefs that were core to traditional Buddhism. And I welcome this development as well, as long as it has clear priorities and as long as it doesn't have at the core of their identity shitting on traditional Buddhists who actually have preserved the Dharma for all this time. So when it comes to reincarnation specifically, I think it's completely fine to practice Buddhism or to find insight in this philosophy without actually believing in reincarnation. The thing is, specifically in the West, we never had non-theistic religions. We never had a major religion that was not focused on devotion to the Creator God.
Buddhism and Jainism, mainly, these two, according to their tradition, no concept of Creator, of God. 2 years ago, one my friend, one doctor, wonderful person, very religious-minded. He sincerely asked me, God, very much compassionate. He creates this world. In his creature, a lot of mischievous people there. Why compassionate God used to create mischievous people? He asked me this question. Then, of course, I know him, so half joke, I told him, since compassionate God created hell, so there must be someone have to go hell. Otherwise, it's empty. It's no purpose creating hell. That's the only answer. Otherwise, no answer. Then, a lot of complications. God, all-knowing, all-powerful, creator. as a creator, all powerful, full mercy, infinite love. These are contradictory sort of things. So difficult. Then philosophical way, the logical way, the God permanent, not changing. Oneness, permanent. So source, permanent. Creature, changing. That also is a contradiction. So the Buddhist, I think Jainism also may be the same. Any phenomena which changing must be their causes. And the causes itself also changing due to its own causes, So beginningless. So that's the basis of limitless sort of lives, life after life. The consciousness is the main basis of designated self or I. So that consciousness, its own special entity. So that substantial cause must be similar nature. So therefore, consciousness never produced by the physical sort of the particles. Similar way, the physical particle cannot sort of produce by mind. Of course, in the cooperative causes, yes, they are. But substantial cause must be same nature. So that's the logical sort of approach, beginningless of mind or consciousness. And also, physical world also beginningless. Our physical, for example, my body, the subtle sort of particles, my body, you see, the continuation of the substantial causes, continuation, no beginning. At the time of Big Bang, already there. The Big Bang also, you see, happened due to tremendous sort of pressure. So this pressure or energy must come from some sources. So that source, again, its own causes. So beginningless. So that's the Buddhist sort of argument.
One time in Vienna, some meeting. That meeting took place in a monastery, Christian monastery. So I think 2 days, some discussion meeting. I think because it was my meeting with the Chancellor, Austria Chancellor. So I left early morning from that monastery. So as usual, sort of my practice, before leaving that monastery, I pay my respect to Jesus Christ, a statue of Jesus Christ in their main chapel. I spent a few moments. Then I reflect, millions of people, you see, get immense sort of benefit from Jesus Christ. So during the reflect these things, then tear comes in my eye. Oh, really wonderful. That does not mean I accept Creator. No. I have plenty of reasons to argue the concept of Creator. Because Dignac, and particularly Dharmakirti, really, you see, put a lot of reasons, argument. If you accept Creator, then a lot of problems here. Among his own creations there. And Creator, no beginning, no end, means permanent. The source is permanent. Then the Creator must be either never happen or permanent.
So in the context of that religion, everything rotates around the relationship with the divine. Stories in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are of paramount qualities because stories represent a direct connection with God, either by the prophet or the emanation of God, the Son of God, or, well, it's the prophet or the Son of God. These are the big ones. Well, the saints also. So these stories are important, and then those individuals as the human emanation of God or as somebody with a core connection with God, like a prophet, they can then convey the stories of God. They can convey the teachings of God and the laws of God. So as you have noticed, I have not mentioned the story of the Buddha at all. While it is certainly important to Buddhists, it really is of completely secondary nature to his actual teachings. The Buddha didn't present his teachings as a law of the Creator. In fact, he explicitly rejected the idea of the Creator God. And so he presented these teachings in the context of the times. And so these teachings have been analyzed and practiced and elaborated on. And throughout the 2,500-year history of Buddhism, it was inevitable with this paradigm for there to emerge enough of insights of psychology and philosophy that could be taken in a completely secular way, without reference to Buddha's enlightenment and without any reference to any creator God that doesn't exist. And so for the modern mind, there is a kind of an inconsistency. Like, I have talked about Buddhist psychology, attachment, and Buddhist philosophy and the intersection between them. And whether you accept them as valid or not, the acceptance or rejection of them have nothing to do with any sort of a religious faith. And that, to this same extent, just doesn't exist in theistic religions. Or at least, in my analysis, maybe I'm being biased, but I'm just not aware of something like that where you can just subtract parts of the Bible or parts of theology or parts of the Judaic law, completely subtract them and have as much material as you could to subtract from Buddhism and still have it be valid in a secular sense. And so today you have adherents of Buddhist philosophy that somehow have deluded themselves to believing that this is not just a segment of Buddhism, but its totality. Now, it is the crucial segment, this philosophy and psychological perspective. It is the central segment of traditional Buddhism, but it is by far not the only one. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always said that there are different categories of Buddhism, like Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist perspective on the mind, and those are open to everyone. And then there is the Buddhist religion that is just for believers. So he himself firmly believes in segregating of these different factors. However, kind of modern secular Buddhism focuses on those things that could be accepted within the materialistic worldview, within the scientific worldview, within the scientific mainstream, as legitimate philosophies, etc. And this is great, and it's completely fine. In fact, Buddha himself in the Pali Canon, there is a sutra where he went to a village, and the villagers said, some people come through here and say that reincarnation is real, and then others say that it is false. What should we believe? And he effectively told them to listen to intelligent people, to the wise men, and then on the basis of their arguments, make up your own mind. He didn't tell them that it is their responsibility to accept reincarnation. However, today there are some fantasists who exist who believe that reincarnation is not at the core of traditional Buddhism, or that the Buddha never taught reincarnation. And that is completely and utterly false. In fact, in the Pali Canon and the earliest undisputed teachings, if you like, of the Buddha, there are clear lists of the superpowers you can expect on your way to enlightenment, which include telepathy, like walking on water, superhuman ability to get sounds, and all of these have been taught by the Buddha. Now, when the Buddha taught, and between when he taught and between when his writings were written down for the first time in the Pali Canon, a few centuries have passed. I think it might have been as much as 300 years. So you can believe that in those 300 years when the Buddhist teachings existed solely as memorized oral transmission, that they have lost and added to them. That originally Buddha would say, no, I don't believe in reincarnation. No, I don't believe in any metaphysical claims. And then it was all distorted, like they preserved the good parts, but they also added the bad parts to it. And the real Buddha is the Buddha of Reddit, the Buddha of intellectual discourse there on Reddit, on different clarifications and stuff like that and memes, whatever. You can believe that, but there's just no basis for it. And yet some people really insist on this, that Buddhism is not a religion. If you define religion as a commitment, a devotion to a creator God, Buddhism is not a religion. If you define religion as having a metaphysical worldview, Buddhism was a religion from the start. There is an exception to it, which is Zen. Now, in Zen, certain Zen masters have said that once the log burns up, it cannot be recreated. That is to say, when our life burns up, there is nothing else afterwards.
There's the view of eternalism. Eternalism, that means you have a soul that is eternal, and after you die, that soul remain intact and go to another body and continue like that. That is eternalism. And then the other extreme is that after you die, well, there's nothing left. Nihilism. And nirvana is the extinction of these two views, nihilism and eternalism.
But Zen is the exception. So I'm not here to say that Zen isn't a valid form of Buddhism or whatever. I'm obviously not interested in that. And if you want to enter a tradition, an old tradition of Buddhism that doesn't stress reincarnation, Zen would be it. But traditionally, if you go back to India, reincarnation was taken for granted, and you can't pretend that it's not there. So if you find one of these goofballs who say that Buddhism in its totality is a philosophy, in the modern definition of things, it definitely isn't. You can extract the completely secular philosophy out of it, and I welcome you to do it. But that's not what Buddhism has existed like for 2,500 years. Well, time is running out for me. Soon I will actually have to go back to doing my job. But before I go, let me list a few more objections, or at least criticism I have to secular Buddhism. And these are two. Number one, it's pretty incoherent. And did I say number two? Number one, it's pretty incoherent. And number two, it's expensive. It's like expensive and incoherent. So you can say whatever you want about traditional Buddhism, but it has a clear goal, enlightenment. And it has a variety of means to get there. Whether you fucking accept any of it is fine. But there is a purpose to what you're doing. Whereas with secular Buddhism, does enlightenment have any meaning anymore? Because enlightenment was, of course, at its core, exiting from cyclic existence, beating karma and rebirth through working with your mind. Whereas if you go on some secular Buddhist Vipassana retreat or whatever, what exactly are you doing there? It's like I remember listening to one teaching from one of these centers, and a woman stood up and said, "What are we doing? And what are we doing here? Why are we doing it?" And the teacher was like, "Let's breathe. One breath out, one breath in. Let's not focus on these concepts." And it was something along those lines. And that's sort of bullshit. What are they doing there? I mean, they're paying a top dollar to be there. So I think the problem with secular Buddhism is that it opens up this possibility of something spiritual, of something awakening, without the baggage of reincarnation and all the other stuff. So they either will present themselves as agnostic on these things, or they will, I don't know, they will do nothing. They will not define another goal. So sometimes they will say, like, enlightenment is in the moment. Nobody can be permanently enlightened, but you will experience moments of awakening. Okay, that's fine. Is that the goal? It should be clearly defined then. You're going to experience some moments of awakening. In traditional practice, when you experience moments of awakening, you don't fixate on them. You just move past them. Because there can be an obstacle to have a profound moment and then equate them with enlightenment. So that's a different approach. In Buddhism, it is well acknowledged that you can develop a very pleasant state of mind and dwell in this pleasant state of mind. However, this pleasant state of mind, much like these moments of awakening, even if you have mastered it and you have stayed in there, it has to be avoided.
And coming to meditation, there are two major types of meditation. Samatha. Sama is in Sanskrit, and in Nepali we say saman, eknas, and in English, etymologically, it's the same word, same. Sama, same, the mind remains the same, and tha is a shortening of stha. Stha again is very close to the English word stay. So the mind stays the same. So I take an object and then meditate on it until mind stays the same for 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever. Exactly, just that object is in the mind. So that is samatha. There are millions of kinds of samatha. Buddha also picked up from what was there in the Indian subcontinent, not necessarily Hinduism as people think, because in the time of Buddha there was no Hinduism, there was Vedic Brahmanism, no Hinduism. Now, there was no Hare Ram, Hare Krishna in the time of the Buddha. There was Vedic Brahmanism and Shramanism. Shramans were those who went into the forest to meditate, to find the answer to life. So, during the time of the Buddha, there was no Hinduism. There were Shramans, and Shaivas were also Shramans. And Jains were Shraman. Mahavir himself called himself Shraman. And the Buddha himself called himself Shraman. And they were Vedic Brahmins. There are meditators in Hinduism who go deep, really make the effort up in the Kedar and so on, and for years and years go into deep samatha. But in Buddhism, samatha does not produce enlightenment. It is just conducive to enlightenment. It can be used for enlightenment. But just samatha alone is going into deep trance, and there are many, many, many levels of trance which are called samadhis. In Buddhism there is pratham dhyan, ditya dhyan, tritiya dhyan, so they are all samadhis, deeper and deeper and deeper levels of samadhis, and finally there is just pure awareness by itself, and you reach in that samadhi, and you even go beyond that, neither awareness nor non-awareness, and so on like that. These are just samadhis, they are just samatha, and they do not address ignorance, nescience. They do not address my kleshas. During that process, my kleshas, emotional defilements, sleep, go latent, but still remain there. They have not been uprooted. Nothing has been done, And there is a story of Sarapa, one of the great 84 Mahasiddhas, Buddhist Mahasiddhas. He says, he who meditates on emptiness is not on the right path. He who meditates only on compassion will not attain liberation at all. He who is capable of uniting the two, then he is free from both samsara and nirvana. So this is Doha's original, Sara's original word. Is still found. Sara was a Brahmin. His wife was a Buddhist. He used to meditate, and one day he went to his house and asked his wife, please make gajar ko halwa. This is carrot halwa. Then he went into meditation and he went into samadhi. He came out after 12 hours. Then he said, where's my gajar ko halwa? Then his wife said, what kind of samadhi is this? What kind of meditation is this? If you cannot forget gajar ke halwa in 12 hours, what's the use of this meditation? Then Sara thought, yeah, that's right. That's correct. So what to do? Then she taught him vipassana. Vipassana. There are many kinds of vipassana. The one that is taught by Sri Goenka is only one kind of vipassana. She taught him vipassana, he meditated on that, and he became a Mahasiddha, a very famous Mahasiddha, and he had 1,000 Brahmin disciples who were also Siddhas. So many Brahmins, even today, go up into the mountains, and also other caste people meditate, really work hard, really make a lot of effort, go into samadhi, deep samadhi, and remain in the samadhi all their life. Now, in Buddhism, that is not conducive to enlightenment. You do not become enlightened simply by going back and forth into samadhi. I'll give you an example. Every night when you go to sleep, we go to deep sleep, sushupti. That is samadhi. So every night we are technically going into samadhi. There is no thought, there is no I, there is nothing. There's just complete blank, right? Every night you are going into samadhi. If just going into samadhi and coming back, a practice would make you enlightened, everybody should be enlightened by the time they're 80 years old. So what is missing is the second type of meditation, vipassana. And what is vipassana? Vi comes from the word vividena, visheshena. Vividena means holistic, visheshena means special, and pashyana means sight, seeing. Now, it has been translated into English as insight. Unfortunately, the word in does not give the word vi correctly. The sight is sight, pashyana is pashyana. So, what do you see? You see that this is impermanent, suffering, no self, and empty. That meditation is vipassana. There are many ways to do it. Sri Goenka teaches only one style. Go to Thailand, there are many different styles. Bodhicharya avatar, Santidev, 6th century, says, Samathena vipassana suyukta kurute klesha vinasanam. By uniting samatha and vipassana, you destroy klesha. Without vipassana, klesha is not destroyed. Because without vipassana, nations is not destroyed. If nations is not destroyed, klesha is not destroyed. So those are two types of meditation. And samatha meditation, Hindu yogis really make great effort. My guru, Urgyen Rinpoche, used to say, some of these Hindu yogis meditate with such effort they make. It's amazing. If they had the right view and the right method, they would go into rainbow bodies. That's what he used to say.
Whereas in secular Buddhism, is that what we're seeking, like a pleasant state of mind that is actually not embodiment of any truth or connection with the ultimate truth that Buddhism is going for? Just a pleasant state of mind? And again, I'm not rejecting this. It is sweet if you can achieve it and train people to experience a subtle sense of pleasure. But those things need to be defined. Like when you go on a retreat, you should have a method to get there, to train people to use meditation as a tool. Like meditation is not the ends in Buddhism. Meditation is a tool to achieve some sort of an end. And in that case, like secular Buddhism to me is sort of incoherent, like I said, and expensive, because they want to give like some taste of spiritual life without giving you a dogma and supernatural beliefs. But that to me is a lie. You should sort of then confine your goals to something that fits into the materialistic worldview, if this is what you ultimately believe in. Aside from that, we kind of live in the world of like expensive retreats and shit like that, which I guess work for some people. So I'm not in any way totally against it. I want there to be secular Buddhism, but the other thing, it's kind of boring.
So good morning, everyone. Welcome to IMC. Some weeks ago, some mention was made about the Buddhist teachings on not self, and I think there was an interest in hearing more about this, and I said I would at some point. It's very easy for this teaching of not self to get pretty heady, and it's often presented as a philosophy or as some kind of doctrine that this is how things are. And it's not meant to be a philosophy at all, I don't think, but rather it's supposed to be a realization, something that we realize or see for ourselves experientially. And so if you don't understand the Buddhist teachings on not self, you don't have to try too hard. It's not exactly something that's meant to be understood as a doctrine and kind of logically and put it all together. And you might find lots of logical reasons why this doesn't make sense. But don't get too hung up about that.
It's really sort of boring. It's a lot of kind of yuppie stuff. Secular Buddhism is. There's just not that kind of the old meat and excitement of traditional Buddhism in there.
Gonna make a change for once in my life. It's gonna feel real good. Gonna make a difference. Gonna make it right. As I turn up the collar on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street without enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their need? Of so much disregard, somebody's broken heart in a washed out dream. follow the pattern of the wind you see. Cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, just take a look at yourself and then make a change.
Alright guys, well, I don't know what I'm doing now. What is the point of like filming this part of the video? Okay. Do you like this rambling so far? The other thing I wanted to say about miracles is that miracles are not the goal of Buddhism. They have been acknowledged as just being a part of the past, certain things that could emerge. So the Buddha said, put on your seatbelt. One time the Buddha met like a yogi, a Hindu yogi. He met a Hindu yogi who, after years of meditation and practice in a non-Buddhist way, was able to walk on water. And the Buddha told him, how long did it take you to acquire this skill? And the yogi said, like, you know, half my life. And the Buddha said, well, couldn't you just pay a few coins to take a ferry? So while Buddhism has traditionally acknowledged the possibility of acquiring mystical skills through practice, that was by no means the goal of it.
Reincarnation is most often associated with Eastern mysticism and the religions of Asia. However, some people of Christian faiths have their own stories of rebirth to tell. One British woman started to question her Protestant upbringing after becoming convinced she had lived before.
When I was a child, I would think about my previous adulthood and my previous childhood, and as I was growing up, it didn't seem incongruous in any way. It was just ordinary memory, and it was just a normal part of my life. Until, of course, I realised that other people didn't have quite the same experiences.
What Jenny remembered with precise detail was the life of a young Catholic woman named Mary, who struggled to raise 8 children in Ireland.
I knew it was the turn of the century, up until the 1930s.
Jenny's mother didn't know what made her 5-year-old daughter cry at night. Her first clue came after Jenny attended Sunday school for the first time.
She was perched on a stool beside me, and she said, they keep talking about the afterlife and what it'll be like in heaven after you're dead. She said, nobody said anything about what it was like in their last life. Is it one of those things grown-ups don't talk about, you know, that how children say these things? And I was a bit surprised, to say the least of it.
Jenny would sit by the fire and draw detailed pictures. A small 2-room cottage near a bubbling stream. Pictures hanging in oval frames on the wall. One of a woman with a child, the other of a soldier. A jetty where she would wait for someone whose face she couldn't make out. She also drew a series of maps in hopes of being able to pinpoint the town in her memories. Scouring maps of Ireland, she kept returning to a speck called Malahide. As Jenny grew older, the memories refused to fade. She felt a constant need to search for her lost children, but knew she couldn't ask her own parents to take her to Ireland. It wasn't until after she married and had children of her own that she was able to act on these recollections. In the spring of 1980, determined not to lose those memories, Jenny took one of her childhood maps to a local bookstore. She found her hand-drawn map closely resembled an actual map of Malahide. But Jenny had kids of her own to take care of, and money was tight. It took 9 years, but finally, in June 1989, she traveled to Malahide, 10 miles northeast of Dublin. First, she found the jetty. Then she spotted the small Catholic church she believed she had attended. And after searching through a field of rubble, she found the ruins of the cottage where she remembered living as Mary. Everything was exactly where it should have been according to her childhood maps.
It was great walking back through Malahide after all that time and finding my way around, recognising things, knowing where I was. I had a map, didn't need it. It was, I knew I was coming home.
Jenny's search was just beginning. She learned that a woman named Mary had in fact lived in the cottage, and her last name was Sutton. When Mary died in the 1930s, her children were sent to orphanages. Jenny guessed some of them must still be alive. She was determined to find them. Jenny was determined. She placed ads in local newspapers and wrote to all the area orphanages and anyone bearing the last name Sutton. Finally, her persistence paid off. Jenny was able to locate Mary's marriage license and the children's baptismal records.
The whole time I think I was concerned about how I was going to approach the family, because I realised that I was going to get to the point where I was going to find them. And I was quite concerned about how I was going to approach them. Whether I had any right to approach them, because obviously I see it, I have the memories of being their mother. I turn up, I'm in a different body, but I have the memories of their mother.
At last, she tracked down Mary's oldest son, Sonny, and mentally prepared herself to make the phone call. What exactly should she say to him? He was only 13 at the time of his mother's death, but likely to have lasting impressions of her. Jenny took a deep breath and dialed the number.
I've been dreaming of your family, she says, since I was about 5 or 6 years old. So I know it's not right to ask a lady her age, but how old are you? I'm 39. So my brain started working again. So you're 39.
That means my mother died 21 years before you were born, he said. Jenny was silent for a moment. Then, tenderly, she proceeded to recount some of her memories. She described the 2 photographs she saw hanging on the wall of the cottage, black and white pictures in oval frames. One of a mother and child, the other a soldier. The accuracy of Jenny's intimate recollections sent a chill down Sonny's spine.
When we finished our phone call, I come and I sat down in the armchair beside my wife, and she looked at me and she says, "My God," she says, "what's wrong with you?" She said, "You look like a ghost." So Ivy said, "I think I've been talking to my mother."
Jenny made plans to meet with Sonny in person and compare memories.
She gave me the first half, and then right away, that's it. You understand? I knew right away what you're talking about.
She saw herself waiting on the jetty, but for whom? She was waiting for Sonny to return from working as a caddy at a nearby golf course. She saw herself standing in front of the cottage, wrestling with a mattress. But why? Once a year, they replaced the chaff in the mattresses, and then struggled to fit them through the doorway. With each shared discovery, the conviction grew stronger. Jenny appeared to be the reincarnation of Sonny's mother. Fragments of her memory fit the life of Mary Sutton. Jenny was ecstatic to finally connect the pieces. Still, though, she worried about the rest of the Sutton children. With more research and Sonny's assistance, she was able to locate the 5 surviving siblings. After 60 years of separation, the family was finally reunited.
I've been trying to do it for nearly 60 years, was to find my family, my brothers and my sisters. Right? So Jenny has found them. Now that has given me a great relief and a release of life. I know where my brothers and sisters are now.
My need to find out if the children were all right, it was my need. It was my need left over from when I was Mary. But I had to find out they were all right. I felt responsibility for them. It was still my job, regardless of the fact that I had changed, I was in a different body. It was still my responsibility to make sure that they were all right, to do something for them.
Today, Jenny lives with her husband and 2 children. At last, Jenny says she has found peace in her life. The peace that evaded her until she traveled to the town of Malahide and walked the streets once again. Is it possible that Jenny knew the intimate details of a woman who lived and died before she was born? Critics say it's more reasonable to view Jenny's story as another example of false memory, as they maintain most claims of reincarnation are. Were Sonny's memories shaped by Jenny's impressions? Or were Jenny's recollections subsequently inspired by conversations with Sonny? Sonny Sutton and his 5 surviving brothers and sisters don't know how to explain Jenny Coquel's amazing story. Sonny, however, was in a unique position to be able to validate or dismiss her memories. He says they are accurate and that no one else could have known them.
Because the sole fact is, when I sit down and think, and I'm on my own, and I think back to my childhood and what Jenny has done, there must be something, somewhere out there. My mother was with her. My mother is in her. And all of my mother did not rest until she knew that the family was reunited.
I find it difficult when people look upon it just as a belief. As I don't actually believe in reincarnation, I have experienced it. I know that's how things happen.
So since reincarnation has already been brought up as a certain kind of a spicy topic, dividing modern philosophical Buddhists, the newly emerging secular Buddhists, from traditional Buddhists, how do Buddhists actually view reincarnation? So the first thing to realize, the first important thing to realize, is that from the point of view of Buddhist reincarnation, I have never lived before. There is no continuation of I from one life to another. Because as we have discussed already, the notion of self is invalid. What's not an illusion is the continuation of awareness. So when you look at a person and when we think about our own self, what we see is our name, our background, our personality, all these outward attributes of who we are or how we designate ourselves. And then other people have their own designations and their own ideas about who we actually are. So there's no real consensus as to who you actually are between yourself, other people, yourself 3 years ago or 5 years ago. You just project a narrative onto the past that was actually less coherent than you imagine. And that's actually where a lot of the issues people experience today, whether it's anxiety or solitude, it has to do with this, I think, or at least partially, has to do with this hyper-creation of I, of trying to reconcile some sort of a permanent self with the world. It's like a children's toy where you try to jam a shape into a hole. You're trying to jam something solid that actually doesn't exist, and its fake solidity causes you pain, dude. You're in pain. You're constantly suffering. Where was I? Yes, so from the Buddhist point of view, what actually reincarnates, to be cute about it, is next to nothing, but it contains everything. And what it actually contains is precisely our proclivities, habits, and reflexes of attachment. That is to say, the habits of our mind and the actions of our mind create imprints in our mind and determine our next existence. So when an ignorant being like myself thinks about my relations with the reality, I think of a permanent Ivan searching for permanent and concrete objective happiness in the external world. So when we think about reincarnation from this perspective, we imagine that this is what's going to reincarnate, the solid, permanent Ivan that intrinsically exists. But actually what's going to reincarnate is specifically a set of these relationships with these objects, how I pursue happiness in the world and the nature of my attachments and what it develops in my psyche, well, in my stream of awareness, how that, forget the psyche, okay? So for example, one simple way to illustrate this chain of actions and reactions that are called karma, the trajectory of karma, is one within just one life. Let's just imagine to what extent the teachings of karma are relevant, even if you are some sort of a secular Buddhist or whatever the fuck. So imagine two bros in college walking around the district, the college district, the bars. Now they get into some sort of a fight. They start arguing with somebody and these two people attack them. And so they start fighting. And one of the bros, let's call him Bob, is just interested in self-defense. He's just interested in self-defense, and then the other person, Mike, is really getting that rage on. He's really filled with hatred and would kill or injure one of these attackers if he could get away with it. And so let's say some more bros show up on the side of the adversary, on the enemy side to Bob and whatever the fuck was the name of the second one, I already forgot. You know, and then they just run away from there, they graduate from college, and just go on with their lives. So even though their actions, their physical actions were identical in fighting, the mental imprint is going to be different. So like I said before, you don't need to be a Buddhist to say that every moment of your awareness is connected to a prior moment of awareness. So like when I say something like white privilege, you have some sort of a reaction of this term, political term, either being valid or being sort of a overused, sort of annoying cliche or whatever, or worse, like an attack on the white race. So why did these reactions emerge? Well, of course, naturally, you have been cultivating them one way or another, and they're connected with other aspects of your existence, like how much anger you have, and what was your political ideology forming around a sense of compassion, a sense of anger, a sense of need to have an identity. All of those things, all of these moments of awareness going back to whenever you started thinking about politics, are now reflected in your reaction to this term. And that is the continuation of karma. What matters with karma, of course, are mental actions, not so much physical actions. These create the trajectory for your next reincarnation, not your specific political beliefs, but things like that. It's like in the same way how your childhood is interconnected with your life today. Whoever you were at the age of 6, 7, and 8, or 9 is dead. That person no longer exists. Even if you had to mentally recreate an average day in your life at that point, you wouldn't be able to do it, chances are, unless you have like photographic memory. Even that could be illusory in nature. So when you talk about your childhood, you're just projecting your current self on the past that no longer exists. But to the same extent that you are connected through your awareness to your childhood, where you were a completely different person, to the same extent you are connected with your prior lives. So the Buddhist logic for it goes that there can't be a spring of water emerging out of the rock. Like rock cannot turn into water. For something to precede something, for something to change into something else, what it is changing into has to be similar to what preceded it. So like one moment of awareness has to be preceded by another moment of awareness. One moment of awareness from a Buddhist point of view cannot be preceded by a moment of matter. And so as a result of it, if you put it back, well, naturally, a moment of awareness that emerges when you began your life, it had to, from another moment of awareness, going back into infinity, beginningless.
So the question is, what proof is there of rebirth?
I already mentioned the law of causality, and among the causes, substantial causes and cooperative causes. So substantial causes, physical level, is own continuation of physical. Mental level, mental phenomena, is own continuation, same nature. I already mentioned this morning. So that's the main. Namshi member, namshi nyele member chian, drup chen, namshi liya, namshi member, namshi nyele chik mari songwa.
In Pramana Vatika, there is a line which says that something which is non-conscious can never become the substantial cause of a consciousness. So His Holiness also want to use this metaphor to say that something which is non-physical can never become the substantial cause of something which is substantial or physical.
That is the main sort of reasons. Yes, you have to think. No, that's one thing. Then other factors, there are people. At least I also met, at least I think, 15, 20 cases, young boys and girls. And then among Tibetan, his same sort of college, you all know the previous sort of monk, good scholar, very good scholar, very good monk. So after a few years, one boy in Lhasa insists, I want to go to India, my monastery in India. Much insist. So then two parents, and anyway, they want to come to India, so they brought, you see, that boy and reached Dharamsala. That boy say, no, this is not my place. My place is South India. Then eventually they reached South India, Monkot. Then they insist, my monastery is there, the Kandan monastery, and Shartha college. Finally, that young boy lead their parent to previous room where he lived. Finally reached there. And then young boy say, on that box, my glass there. Then open, there's glass. So this is fact. So, because there is something to remember, so this memory comes. Some may be true, some may not be, but like that. Then, my own case, the great 14th Dalai Lama. When I was very young, say 2 years, 3 years, according to my mother, some indication.
Number 5. He was an unusual child, which might have landed him the job. I'm gonna go ahead and say it, the Dalai Lama was a weird kid. As a young boy, His Holiness remembers hanging out in the family's chicken coop and making clucking noises alongside the hens, as well as running up to his father and tugging on his mustache. The young boy also liked packing a bag and saying, I'm going to Lhasa, which is the capital of Tibet. After the 13th Dalai Lama died, Buddhist monks searched across Tibet looking for the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama as per their tradition. The monks found the odd little boy and tested him by bringing out some of the belongings of the old Dalai Lama and placing them beside objects that weren't his. And every time the young boy grabbed the Lama's things, shouting, mine, that's mine.
This is mine. Mine, 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 mine.
The verdict? The monks had found their reincarnated leader. The Chinese government have declared that they are in charge of finding his successor, and their involvement would probably mean that it would be someone who grows up to be more cooperative with Chinese rule in Tibet. But But recently, His Holiness has gone a step further and said he might choose not to reincarnate at all, which would make it impossible for the government of China to claim a successor.
The Dalai Lama institution will cease one day. This man-made sort of institution will cease. No guarantee.
And then one important, the search party, delegation, search party, reached my home. I identify each person's name, their rank, like that. So now today, even what happened yesterday, sometimes it's difficult to remember. That, I think, most cases, now like that young boy, nowadays, no longer any sort of expression of past life. I think that also is, we can explain. The brain, new body, just at the beginning, just growing, then still the past memories influence, still more fresh. Then, year by year, this brain further develop, then the past memory, then diminishing. I think long illness, old age, gradually, I think the power of the memory somehow, little sort of, within this lifetime, within sort of reduce. So, seems to see more difficult. It seems. So, if you want to carry memory next life, then better to die early age. Including myself. Unless you make some effort for meditation and sharpening our mind through meditation. Then some my friend, after their meditation, then memory about past life. Not very clear, but some memory, you see, comes. At least, I think, 3-4 my friend. They actually have this kind of experience. These are the witness. Then, another sort of phenomena. After death, this is now quite common now among Tibetan. Perhaps I think some other people also, I think usually within few hours, sometimes it's burn, sometimes coughing. Right?
Coughing. No, put it coughing.
Otherwise, I think there is possibility. Remain body very fresh. So Tibetan case, since we have that kind of understanding about that, so therefore, I think last 50 years, at least, I think 30 cases after death, their body remain very fresh. 1 week or 5 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, like that. So, including my own tutor, senior tutor, after death, the physician come and check whether that really is dead or not. They clinically dead. But then body, without any sort of chemical thing, body remain very fresh next 13 days. Then one great scholar, as well as a great Sorority practitioner, actually one head of Yellowhead sect, 100th sort of Kandechiva.
The 100th representative of Tsongaba's tradition, the head.
Oh. So his case, after death, clinically dead. Then I think after 5 days, I received that information. His body still remained fresh. So we usually call tukdam. So then I immediately sent a signal to our clinics in Dharamsala. They already kept some equipment, carrying some experiment. Because some previous sort of meeting with scientists, this sort of topic discussed. So they developed some interest. So they left some equipment to dead bodies sort of head, some wires like that. So then immediately, with that equipment, and I think 1 or 2 people went there and put all the wires on his head. Then next, I think 18 or 19 days remain very fresh. So we already have some sort of project scientifically carry more research. To scientists, so far no answer. But it's a phenomenon, it's a fact. So we have to find explanation. Then one strange thing, last year, when I visit New Zealand, so when I reached there, one Tibetan Lama, I know him, already, I think, 4 days already passed. But his body remained fresh. Local doctor, I think in the hospital. So it's a doctor, have to get some sort of permission from doctor. You can keep that dead body. So doctor check. And that body, the doctor agree now, very fresh, so leave it. So then I think after five days, one night, that dead body previously remained, I think remained like this. Then the 5th night, I think 5th night or 4th night, the left hand, so this finger, tightly, because what the hold by right hand. So very tight. So I express, oh pity, you should keep a movie camera 24 hours, then know the movement, how developed. So pity, they never sort of put that camera. In fact, the dead body, after 4 or 5 days, then move that hand and go like that, and very tight. That I think remain 11 days or 12 days, like that.
Well, tonight we attempt to explain the inexplicable. Is it possible to live on in your body after you've passed away? Well, recently in Dunedin, a man died. A doctor certified him dead. Now, here's the curious bit, the bizarre bit. For the following 3 weeks, the body lay on a bed, cross-legged, beneath a flimsy shroud, with no discernible deterioration. No rigor mortis, no smell. How can that be? Well, doctors and scientists can't explain it, but Buddhists in Dunedin say they can. Here's John Hudson.
A mysterious funeral for a Tibetan monk. For hundreds of years, this ceremony has been held across Asia, whenever Buddhists cremate their dead. But this isn't Asia, it's Dunedin, and the body being cremated is that of a spiritual master. But what's really astounding is that the spiritual master, Thupten Rinpoche, has been dead for 20 days, his body showing little decay before being cremated. That's because, his followers say, he's been in a death meditation. Thupten Rinpoche is considered to be a reincarnate Lama. He lived a remarkable life, entering a Tibetan monastery at just 4, meditating on compassion for the next 66 years.
The essence of his practices, I think, were devotion to others, care of others, and as a result, people loved him. You know, they really loved him for that.
When I heard about Thupten Rinpoche's death meditation a fortnight ago, I asked to see his body.
Thank you very much.
The lamas here at the Dagi Buddhist Center welcomed us in and agreed to allow our cameras into the room where Thupten Rinpoche was lying cross-legged on a bed. He certainly looked dead.
And he's been dead for 15 days.
15 days?
15 days, yeah.
Thupten Rinpoche was lying under a shroud. The room temperature, 13 degrees. They showed me his face, his hair, his legs, and they told me he'd died of stomach cancer.
How long before Thupten does he think will leave his body? What?
Maybe it will take some time. Months, weeks, we don't know how long.
Will he decide when he leaves his body?
Yes, he chooses when he leaves his body.
And how will you know when he's finished, when he's gone?
Sometime in the end, there is some blood, and it's smelly.
Because I can't smell any decay. Has he had any form of embalming fluid or anything like that put into his body?
No, nothing.
Nothing at all. What's happening here is just astounding. It's incredible. I've seen a number of people die of cancer in my lifetime, but the man under the shroud here died on May the 24th. That's weeks ago. And yet there's no smell at all. His skin is still elastic. His hair isn't falling out. I'm told there's been no chemicals added to his body. His body hasn't even gone into rigor mortis. Now, to many people, that's kind of spooky. But to the Buddhists here, it's not entirely surprising. But perhaps he wasn't dead at all.
It wrote on the death certificate it was a gastric cancer and it had spread around his body.
We wanted to make sure that Thupten Rinpoche had died when we were told he had died. So we went to his doctor, Jeremy Hay.
He died on the night of the 24th of May.
So 16 days ago now?
16 days, yeah.
How do you determine that somebody is dead?
That's a matter of listening to their heart for a period of time, making sure that there's no heart sounds or no breath sounds, and that's what I did.
I saw a body that looked quite well preserved.
Dunedin GP Stephen Graham had seen Thupten Rinpoche 8 days after death. A further 8 days later, we asked him to take another look.
Has there been any change since you saw him last?
I'd probably say there's been a small change in some of the skin, but there's no sign of, I suppose, corruption, you know, of no smell or anything like that.
You would expect there to be some smell?
Yeah, there's no smell. No smell at all.
While the Dalai Lama admires science, Scientists and Buddhists tend to have differing views on how to explain reality.
We've certainly seen instances of people lasting a few days with no intervention, but I've also seen examples where nature takes its course very, very quickly, and people change their looks within a matter of hours.
Occasionally, people like funeral director Michael Hope get to see bodies discovered long after death.
You'd usually see some visible aspects. There might be some distension and swelling, probably some odour. It would be an expectation, and some of the facial features might have changed a little bit, the eyes might have darkened.
But Michael Hope says he has on rare occasions seen cases where bodies have been well preserved, even weeks after death, without any chemical intervention.
I have struck it where after even a couple of months we actually found someone that was far better condition than we would have expected. So it was still unpleasant, but was still quite remarkable, and that was just again a number of factors that had come together.
So what are those factors that slow bodily decay? Well, Dr. John Rutherford is someone who should know.
There may well be a rational and reasonable physical explanation for it all without having to invoke some unusual, mysterious, poorly understood psychic phenomena.
Dr. Rutherford's been a pathologist for more than 30 years. His work involves examining dead bodies, sometimes months, even years after death.
Under what conditions could a body stay intact for nearly 3 weeks after death?
The conditions would be relatively cool ambient temperature, relative dry humidity, and if the intestine was relatively empty of organisms that would normally spread through the body and cause putrefaction. And the latter condition might be the result of fasting or might be the result of a wasting disease.
Thupten Rinpoche died of cancer, a wasting disease. His body was left in a dry, relatively cool room and wasn't moved. But what about the apparent lack of rigor mortis?
Rigor mortis will develop over a period of about 12 hours. It will then remain fairly stable and fixed for about 12 hours, and then it will fade off over the next 12 hours.
So do you believe in this death meditation?
I think the story, as you put it to me, strains the limits of my credulity. I personally don't believe it's possible to meditate after death because I think the subjective experience of being a human is dependent upon physical brain activity. That is not to say that I couldn't be wrong, but personally I don't believe that it is possible after death.
Yeah, I will say it's possible.
Za Chögyal Rinpoche is not only a believer, he's a Lama given the job of helping Thupten Rinpoche into his next life.
Buddhist practice, we have so-called like a death practice, and many practitioners actually they do that practice every day. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, one time he said that actually he dies 6 times a day, which means that he's practicing death 6 times a day.
What do you say to skeptics who say his heart stopped beating, he stopped breathing, he is dead?
I think it's just skeptics, if they are suspicious, I think they have the rights to be, skeptic about it. We're not trying to prove anything, we're just kind of following what we believe.
What they believe is that last Saturday, Thupten Rinpoche ended his death meditation. His spirit, they believe, is moving on to a new life, and to help him, his old body is symbolically dressed as a Buddha, then cremated.
Once they leave the body, Now it is just a body.
In case you're wondering, it is perfectly legal for people to do their own cremations, and in this case, health authorities visited the Buddhist centre several times to make sure the body posed no health hazard. Now, all this week, we've received tributes for Thupten Rinpoche, like this one from a student. His kindness and teaching has been one of the transformational forces in my life.
So we need some explanation. From Buddhist viewpoint, grosser level of mind cease because brain work cease. As soon as heartbeat stop, the blood circulation to brain cease. So within short period, brain die. So the grosser level of mind already dissolved. But subtle mind, there. Now I think too much. But I think one further explanation. The head of Mongolian Buddhist, Jibsun Thamba, I know very well. So I know since childhood. So recently I received information he very, very sick, very serious. The Mongolian doctors is already expressed now he cannot remain. Now only number of days he will die. And then I received one message from him. Asked me where he should die, Mongolia or in India, and when should die. I also answer, or you should die in Mongolia, and time not end of the Tibetan year, but New Year. That's the time to die, time of death, die. He acted exactly that. As soon as my message is received, his body becoming more fit. Then exactly Tibetan New Year, 8th Tibetan New Year, I think 1st March. So then, in early morning, he inquired to his entourage, now this is time to go. Then the entourage, I know, that also I know very well, one good Lama, Veserimchi. That monk, you see, thought, oh, he asking, moving another room. Then he answered, yes, this is right time. Then he died. Then I received, within, I think 1 hour, I received message. He died. So his body remained very fresh. Then I immediately sent my representative, Professor Samdor Rinpoche, I sent, with one scarf. I think after 4 days, the very day my representative reached there, afternoon, long flight from India. So that morning, some indication, some liquid come from his mouth. But then that Lama asked me, now should start work of sort of preparation, put sort of his body, sort of not fire, remain like
preserved in a crystallized form.
Oh yes. So there are a little bit of hurry. Then I carry some investigation. It seems better to wait till my envoy reach there. So the Professor Samdor Rinpoche reached around local time around 4, reached there. Then put scarf, which I sent, put on his sort of head. Then within a short period, then go like that, dead. So these are quite strange, isn't it? These are mysterious things. I think open-minded scientists, I think a lot of work to further investigate these things. So already now started. Now last almost now 40 years, I start some serious sort of the discussion with scientists. Then I developed really my admiration. Those genuine scientists, their mind open and skeptical, they're ready to investigate, and their attitude very objective. Sometimes I think the religious people, some way fixed in our mind. They are really open, wonderful, and very, very unbiased.
Let's take a look at this depressing image that hangs outside all of the temples and monasteries in Tibet. This is the wheel of life. The wheel of life, and it... crap. You see, it's already causing problems. Let's see, I'm trying for it not to be reflected. Okay, I think that's the best I can do. Okay, my friends, so this is the wheel of life. So here you have a picture of people ascending upward with good karma and people descending downward depending on their deeds and their mental actions. So these are the 6 realms of existence. This is the realm of the gods, the high realm of existence. This is the realm of jealous gods, and this is the human realm. These are the higher realms. Obtaining a precious human birth is a huge achievement relative to everything else. You could have become like animals and hell beings and hungry ghosts. Actually, these 2 realms, you would think being a god is a good thing, and these aren't really gods. It's another mistranslation, whatever. The problem here is that their level of enjoyment, their level of pleasure is so high here. Their suffering is so subtle in nature that it is difficult to really practice the Dharma. It's hard to do in the lower realms. It's too painful and difficult. Whether, here it is too pleasurable in these 2 realms. So the human realm is the best place to practice the Dharma because you're sort of in the middle there. The nature of your suffering isn't this great, but it's also the nature of your pleasure also isn't this great. So in the middle, it's a nice place to be. So here driving everything is this representation of 3 animals that have unique representations. So there is I swear, the sun just moves by itself. It's a little bit creepy. Okay, my friends, we heard that depressing music, so let's look at the cycle here. These 3 animals, the dove represents attachment and lust, the snake represents anger, and the pig, now, according to the many sutras and tantras, the pig has a very unique symbolism behind it here. And it's your mom. Oh, didn't see it coming. I know that maybe there's one Buddhist still watching this video, kind of eager to judge me, and he already kind of forgot about the earlier your mom joke, and here, once again, the righteous Buddhist anger is reignited. The pig represents ignorance. So these are the 3 drivers of the cycle of existence. Now here, you can see the Buddha standing outside of this cycle in a state of cessation. And this is Yama, the Lord of Death. He represents the inevitability of death, but also the law of karma.
The 3 poisons chase each other round and round, causing endless cycles of suffering, cycles which can only be broken by cultivating the wisdom and method of a Buddha. The processes whereby the 3 poisons perpetuate endless lifetimes in samsara are illustrated by the outer ring. Here, the 12 links of dependent origination describe how someone's ignorance influences the qualities of mind, body, and even the surrounding environment. Ignorance, the first link in the chain of samsara, is symbolized by a blind person who gropes in darkness without directly seeing reality. Ignorance is blind to the true nature of the self and the world around. Karma, the second link, is the result of ignorance because it colors all mental and physical activities with relative degrees of good and bad. Like a potter molding clay, the relative qualities of each mental and physical act determine the shape of things to come. Consciousness, the third link, when conditioned by ignorance and karma of a previous life, flits back and forth like a monkey from one object to the next. Human consciousness begins with conception, the fertile conjoining of the sperm and egg together with a mind conditioned by previous lives. Name and form, the fourth link, depend on the quality of consciousness. They are analogous to a mind and body, here represented by an oarsman steering a boat down the river. Mind and body are the basis for the six senses, the fifth link. They are the organs for touching, tasting, smelling, hearing, seeing, and mental perceptions. Contact, the sixth link, is made possible by the six senses. Contact is represented by sexual embrace, the most potent sensation. Feeling, the seventh link, arises from contact with the outside world. Inevitably, all feelings result in suffering, here represented by an arrow in the eye. Craving, the eighth link, is the result of feeling. For example, the feeling of a sexual embrace produces a craving for more. But craving can include the strong desire to be separated from an unpleasant object. Attachment, the ninth link, is represented by a person grasping for the fruit of previous desires. The quality of the next life is influenced by the kind of objects to which one is attached in the present life. The 10th link is called existence because it is a mental and physical state of being which foretells the nature of the next lifetime. Birth, the 11th link, is predicted by the causal chain of all thoughts and actions of the previous life. Birth will be fortunate or unfortunate depending on the relative merits accumulated in the past. Aging and death, the 12th link, are merely the last moment before a new birth. Powerful prayers and meditation at this time can help create a happy future life. According to Buddhist doctrine, all ordinary sentient beings are bound to continual rebirth in samsara, the round of suffering. Human beings are tied to the links of dependent origination, and their only hope for release is by following the path of the teachings of wisdom and morality taught by the Buddha.
If the Buddha could create the world, he wouldn't create this world as it is, with all the suffering. Since we're ignorant of our actions and of the reactions, ignorant of the way the world works, we perpetuate our own suffering. For the three lower realms, we have the animal realm. The animals, of course, don't understand cause and effect. That is their major difference. They exist in the state of confusion and dullness relative to humans. So here there are different hells, the hot hells and the cold hells, some other hells here. And this is the realm of the hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts they're defined by thirst, by desire, but they have big stomachs and they have tiny mouths, and they are unable to ever fulfill their desire. They exist in the state of continuous suffering. So being born as a human, and also being born in a situation where you actually encounter the Dharma, this is a very rare event.
How do you reconcile the phenomenon of reincarnation and continuity with the fundamental Buddhist principle of impermanence?
Oh, the one who is asking this kind of seemed to insinuate that the reincarnation and the impermanence are contradiction, but they are not. Actually, reincarnation is very aspect of the impermanence. But reincarnation is a big subject. Reincarnation, by the way, again, I'll try to abbreviate this very. Reincarnation, in order to understand reincarnation, you have to appreciate law of time. Do you believe in time? Well, might as well believe in reincarnation. As a Buddhist, if you ask me, do I believe in reincarnation and time? Ultimately, no. Relatively, yes. A scientist who kind of raise their eyebrow, oh, what about this reincarnation, this, this Buddhist reincarnation stuff, but who just blindly says, oh, see you tomorrow. I was there yesterday. It's stupid. Reincarnation is stupid. Time is stupid. That's why they are relative. But stupid does not mean that they are useless. Many stupid things are useful. Okay. I'm sorry, because there's so many questions. I'm trying to answer all. So we have to make it very short. Some of the answers may be a little bit cryptic, but...
Rinpoche, this is also a very long question.
So while you are likely to be reborn as a human being, you don't want to take that for granted. Eventually, my friend, you're going to get flushed down that toilet of karma because of something you did. And the whole thing starts over again. In that sense, Buddhist hells are worse than Christian hells, because there is, I guess, when Christ is coming back, you could be rescued for them, or something along the lines. Whereas in Buddhist hells, there is no savior. Buddha wants you to be happy. He wants you to not suffer. But you yourself, only your mind, can liberate itself. The Buddha can only give you directions and inspiration. He cannot do anything else. So you're just going to be klutzing around, schmucking around in this thing for eternity, as we have been already. So when Mahayana Buddhists motivate themselves, the motivation is to obtain enlightenment for the sake of mother sentient beings. And the word mother there is not incidental. We have been going around and around in this thing for eternity, effectively, before this universe got started. And so everybody has been your mother at one point or another. I didn't mean that to rhyme. I just didn't really mean that to rhyme. But yes, so this is really a horrifying thing, this thing, especially when you consider that existences in these realms, in hell realms, are longer, sometimes much longer than a human life. So how does a person end up in a hell realm? Well, let's say you're a dictator, like Joseph Stalin or whoever, or Hitler or whoever. You have been powerful and you have a strong sense, you're grasping for that self-identity as power. But because you have created so much negative karma by killing, every killing itself is an imprint, a mental relationship that now defines the trajectory of your existence. And under anger, from the Buddhist point of view, there's fear. So when you die, you get stripped of your body and you are naked in a sense. Your awareness actually goes into a pure state and you project your attachment or whatever it is onto it. So if you actually have been practicing Buddhism for your whole life, once you see that pure awareness, that white light that is reported in near-death experiences around the world, from the Buddhist point of view, it's the luminous nature of your awareness. So if you're a Christian, you're going to see God in it or project God upon it. But from the Buddhist point of view, it's your pure awareness. However, if you're defined by anger and fear, this is what you're going to project to it, and you will create a trajectory, almost like a gravitational pull, into a lower realm, where those sentiments and those defining features of your mind are actually reflected. So I urge you not to listen to any Tibetan Buddhist jokers, and by which I mean Westerners, who dismiss this whole thing as mental states. When they say, oh, these are just different mental states. So these are certainly mental states that exist within the human realm. Like there are hungry ghosts, people who are defined by their greed and unsatisfied thirstiness. This is definitely true. However, these realms are as solid as petting your cat. Those are not 6 metaphors. And of course, from the point of view of emptiness, all of those lack inherent existence. But so does this, this lacks inherent existence. And before you are able to realize emptiness as your living experience, before I can not just conceptually define this as empty of inherent existence, but actually realize it as such, view it as such intrinsically and reflexively, until then, those are as solid as this.
What did you think about those people at the party tonight?
I don't know. Okay, I suppose. Wow, some of these are pretty deep. Do they hurt much?
You know, I've decided I'm going to do some serious thinking about religion.
Well, the first thing is to get these feet to the doctor tomorrow.
All right, my babies, I want to clarify a few things here. I want to clarify a few things lest you be confused about your future and the continuum of your awareness. Because I think that certain things I have said just now could be misleading or at least incomplete. Since ignorance is the origin of suffering, we have to dispel it here. We don't want to create any more. So what I want to say is this. The wheel of life, as it is presented here, certainly is a metaphor in many ways. It's a painting, an illustration created for effectively illiterate people, or just a stark reminder for everyone. Created to generate a sense of urgency, to really hustle your ass a little bit when it comes to this. Not just be attached or defined only by this moment in awareness. Certainly, we don't live, for example, in a huge wheel, and you don't move through that wheel in a kind of a clockwise direction. The mind is of the essence here, the state of mind is of the essence, and the specific illustrations of these worlds are completely secondary, and people debate their nature. So, for example, there are a lot of debates in Buddhism whether the torturers in the hell realms are actual sentient beings themselves, or whether they are projections of the mind. And the mind is also supreme in the higher realms. So the belief about the higher realms is that if somebody has cultivated a kind of a spiritual awareness, if they have cultivated a spiritual state through meditation or devotion to a god or something, then of course when they pass away, their mind is going to take a more formless shape. It's going to elevate itself to one of these higher realms. And so there are multiple levels of heaven dependent on the relative formlessness and the subtlety of the body that a mind has within those realms. That is to say, if you have really dwelled in your life as a human on a higher kind of spiritual plane, then when you pass away, this is where you're gonna go. So the specific illustration of this realm, or the description of this realm, is entirely secondary to the state of your mind that brought you to that realm, and that then defines the state of your awareness in this realm. But what I meant to say when I said that this is not a metaphor, these aren't six metaphors, is that what is not a metaphor from the Buddhist point of view is the fact that you will dwell in those realms. That is to say, they certainly exist within the human realm, and what you cultivate within the human realm will define your rebirth, but that rebirth, that continuation of awareness, will in fact happen. So those realms are real, states of mind that exist outside of our human life. In that sense, they're not at all metaphors. However, their specific details, like I said already, are completely of a secondary nature. So I want my Dharma babies to really realize that what we're talking about here so much is not the Buddhist worldview, which is how I've been talking about it, but more of a Buddhist mind view. The mind is not physical. It is interconnected with our body, intimately and intricately, as would be described in tantric teachings. However, it is not defined solely by our body. It preceded our body. And so our life right now as humans is really a dance of mind and flesh. The mind picks the body, and then they go for a tango, that they're interconnected. It's like a rolling bowl of meat. What gave this bowl of meat the roll, what set it on a path, is of course the trajectory of our mind from the previous birth, from the previous moment of awareness. What you're looking at when you're looking at the wheel of life is really the wheel of mind or the continuation of mind, or different states of mind that will be very concrete and real if you bring your ass into one of these realms. These are the realms of the mind, the states of the mind. So I don't want to mislead you by saying that it's not a metaphor in a sense that you take these specific illustrations so literally. I mean, if you look at the idea of reincarnation, it is in fact really trippy. When you're looking at like an animal, for example, all it is a dance of meat and mind. This mind has really become highly narrow. It has become confined to a very narrow existence, an existence defined by a search of food, a search of survival. However, it is just an intermediary state. Any state of ours is an intermediary state, and that mind of a mosquito can expand into the human mind and can expand into the mind of the Buddha. So we're inherently not in any way defined by our humanness. However, if our mind is defined by our brain, that is to say the meat came first and the mind is just a projection, a reflection of that meat, meaning that it is an intermediary state between the electric meat, right? The electric meat sends a signal and then we experience it as our own choice. We live in that circle of meat, of electric meat, and we experience it as choices, as awareness, as something outside of it, but it in fact is confined within that prison. So that is a certain materialistic worldview, and within that, of course, having a teacher and spending time stretching the meat, as it were, only has a limited utility. So it's quite a trippy idea, my friends.
I joke with a lot of my friends who have become Buddhists from a Christian background, and you had to deal with one hell that was too much for you. You come into Buddhism, we have 18 hell realms to start with. So, what do they say? From the frying pan into the fire kind of a situation happens. I think when you limit or when you have a very narrow and limited understanding about the capacity of mind's conceptualization and the potential of conceptualization, then you create a very small world around yourself within which certain things are possible and certain things are not possible. So to study and to reconcile or to be able to understand the Buddhist concept of hell realms, for example, I think it's leave it for the moment. Don't struggle with it. If you don't believe it, you don't believe it. That's really one way to look at it. Instead, try to understand the creative potential of your mind. Now that you cannot argue with, it's easy to see. Then make it bigger. Come out of your own little well. Come out of your own little world to begin to actually see the limitless potential of conjuring and creation that your mind has. It can create a single doubt. You smile at a person, when you pass by, the person doesn't smile at you. Your mind can go click, 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 and into just this whole storyline of how good or bad you are or the other person is, and then the immigration problems, and this is how no one should come into your country, and therefore, you are better in your own, and the cultural differences. You can write a whole thesis on it. That's how creative your mind is. Now, if you look at that creative potential of your mind, then you begin to understand that it can create worlds of experiences of its own. Hell, and the whole concept of hell is just such a minuscule example of the torture and the enormous suffering that a mind can actually create for its own self. Now, if you interpret it if you look at it that way, it's not hard to explain. 18 is just, top of the crust, as they say. There's just limitless creations of diverse hells here and anywhere else.
So in the example with the two college bros who got in a fight, we can see how, even though their actions of the body were exactly the same, the direction of their awareness would define the rest of their life to one degree or another. Like the more angry, the more vicious of the bros, I think his name was Mike, well, he could lead a more aggressive life, with this being both the symptom of his prior reflexes and the cause of development of further habitual patterns and being quick to anger and then getting his ass kicked or killed. The other bro would lead a life defined by that one action, interconnected with his previous action, and this one action defining his future as well. So we always live at an intersection of our previous karma, of our previous reflexes and inclinations, and of our awareness right now, without being mindful, without observing our awareness and giving it a new direction. The old karmas are just going to define us, and we're just going to tumble around in samsara in our life without really having freedom. The idea of free will in Buddhism is connected specifically with awareness, not with the notion of self. As a self, since it's non-existent, we cannot be free from that vehicle, from that vantage point, but we can when we understand the laws of karma. So that would be freedom, ending the cycle of attachment and suffering this way. However, the results of our actions are not confined to this life alone. In fact, they extend further, many lifetimes into the future. So the way these karmas work is that once I do a strong action, like killing somebody or, I don't know, rape or whatever it is, an imprint remains in my awareness. And this imprint might surface when I am dying at that moment. There could be an overall trajectory of so many things that I have done that they're going to define my next rebirth. But depending on the imprint and how it fits into the overall schema of my flow of awareness, it just sort of remains there. So what happens then is a kind of, so let's say you and I are both born in a war-torn territory, and your predisposition toward anger directs you into being a soldier, and so you get killed, whereas I don't. But alternatively, it doesn't even have to be this explicit. It could be just that we're in the same house when a grenade is thrown in, and you die and I don't, because of our prior karma. So that negative karma that has caused your demise in this life could actually have originated many lives before. So these actions of the mind remained as some sort of a spring, like a genetic predisposition. Like both of us could be smoking cigarettes for 20 years, and then you die of lung cancer after 15, whereas I go on to smoke for 20 years and I give it up, and then I more or less live a normal, healthy life after that. The same environment, but different predisposition, almost like a genetic markers that get activated under stress.
But karma is, of course, one of the vastest topics in Buddhism. So there's so many different aspects, so many different ways of understanding, and it's so complicated that it's much harder to understand in all its complexity, much harder to understand than emptiness, for example, selflessness. So karma is actually a Sanskrit term which means action. So it basically means volitional action. And so karma is the action, and then you have the law of karma and their results. The law of karma is actually a type of law of cause and effect. So we have lots of laws of cause and effect. I mean, the laws of cause and effect in terms of like nature and in everyday life. I mean, the law of cause and effect, it's obvious, it's all around us. But if you divide the law of cause and effect into two, the one that is associated with intention and the one that is not associated with intention, then karma is a law of cause and effect that is associated with intention. And sometimes, I think as Westerners in particular, we look at karma as this kind of being, saying, oh, today you kind of did good, like judges. We have an instinctive sense. So it's important to understand that the law of cause and effect, the law of karma, is just a law of nature. So we don't have we possibly also have the sense that out of a seed there's this magical person that brings forth an apple tree, for example. Right? I mean, for some people there's that sense, maybe there's a celestial being involved. So then, of course, our actions leading to certain results, there's the sense that we're being involved. But it's just a kind of a law of nature, that works on its own due to the existence of this that arises, is basically helping us to understand that there's no such entity, some celestial entity behind the experiences we have. And the second one is the idea that karma is not something permanent, that there's not something permanent, unchanging, that gives rise to the kind of experiences we have. It's like actions leading, ever-changing action, leaving an imprint, then there's ever-changing experiences that result from those. For a cause to give rise to a result, it must have the potential to do so. So not anything, it's not just anything can give rise to anything else. So only that which has the potential to give rise to a certain effect can do so. Basically, the mental factor of intention is any mind, any state of mind, whether it's a sense consciousness or a mental consciousness, is associated with a type of intention. But the word intention is it's the translation that is used, but there's a difference between intention and motivation. Intention is basically this faculty of the mind that moves the mind towards an object. Right? It moves the mind towards an object, like a magnet is moved. Like a magnet moves a piece of iron, or actually the magnet is moved towards the pieces of iron, if you like. It moves towards that. So in the same way, the intentional part of our mind, which is called intention, moves towards an object. So that's said to be where karma is accumulated, but that kind of intention, it's always present. For example, with the sense consciousness, it's always neutral. So with the sense consciousnesses, the actions we engage in, they're always neutral, so there's nothing to worry about. It's the mental consciousness, the ever-present mental consciousness. Of course, the sense consciousnesses are not always present while we sleep, while we're unconscious, during the time of death, they disappear. The mental consciousness is ever present. So that's the one we need to look at, because there, with the mental consciousness, you have positive, negative, and neutral actions. And they, of course, are responsible, therefore, for our positive, negative, and neutral results, experiences. So what happens? Every time we engage in an action, any time there's an action we accumulate, what happens is, to give you an example, we talk to someone, we have a conversation with a friend, and they say something, and we generate compassion. So in that moment, we, in our head, in our mind, the mental consciousness possibly plans to say something that helps them to deal with a problem, for example, to deal with a situation. So that action, that mental intention, and of course, when saying something positive, it leaves a residue in the mind, isn't it? It's called an imprint. An imprint, again, if you think of imprints, well, this expression, of course, comes from Sanskrit, from India. So I guess an imprint in the dust, or the imprint in Tibet, it would be the imprint in the snow. Like you leave something behind. So likewise, on our consciousness, of course, it's non-physical. We use language of the physical, kind of physical areas, like we say, imprints of a foot, or right in the snow, which is very much physical, but we shouldn't think of it as in a physical way, but in a non-physical, since the mind is non-physical. So it just, every time there's a thought, every time the mental consciousness is active, it leaves some residue there. And those residues, they stay until they're ripened. But from a Buddhist point of view, it goes over many lifetimes. So actions are left, and you can see it like in everyday kind of life. If you take certain seeds, apple seeds, different seeds, they ripen at different times. I mean, even if you sow seeds, they ripen, one ripens first and another one later. Another one stays the whole winter, and then next year it ripens. So here, these karmic seeds, of course, they're not as dependent on the physical environment. There's no expiry date. And so therefore, they can stay with us for a really long time. And then just when the circumstances come together, they may ripen. But again, it's this idea of past and future life. So, it comes in there again. Very difficult idea. And of course, as I always say, well, to think of it in terms of there's a 50% chance there are past and future lives, and then 50% chance there aren't. But really, karma, to understand it in its fullest, taking past lives into consideration, definitely makes it easier.
These specific conditions that come together for this karma to ripen might not come for a long time. You could lead 10 virtuous lives after committing a horrible offense, and then causes and conditions will come together and ripen, and you're going to get fucked one way or another. So all karmas have to ripen. The only way for them not to ripen, not to surface, is to override them with purification, by doing positive deeds and by purifying your awareness, your stream of awareness, so that they're going to be cleaned out of there. But even then, there are no 100% guarantees until you get enlightened. All the bodhisattvas, the extraordinary beings who have transcended ordinary minds and are moving to Buddhahood, they all experience karmas up until enlightenment. On the later stages, this karma is going to be fainter, but there still horrible things could still happen to them, even if they're pretty close to Buddhahood. So that's the horror of karma. We don't really control it, but we are defined by it. And we can wrestle away some control only by working with our mind, as opposed to leaving our mind as a natural and habitual generator of karma.
Adieu, mon cher.
Goodbye, everybody. Wish me luck.
Good luck.
So karma itself is a whole separate field of study, and there are different theories about karmas and how karmas affect the result that human beings experience. And this is something that I would really like to study to get a better understanding of it, because while it is clear, let's say, or I could draw a rational kind of progression of events, how if I have cultivated anger, how I could go into a lower realm of existence, or how I could be born in the human realm again and then participate in violent actions and experience suffering again and maybe get more violent and then go to the lower realm. I can understand these processes. However, earthquakes, tsunamis, things that are connected with the material world, it's not clear how they intersect with my mental actions committed in a previous life. So there's a lot to study there, my friends, a lot to investigate on that front.
Those jewels aren't from the dwarf's diamond mine, are they?
I don't think so.
So I don't know if these specific worlds are described in the same exact way in the Theravadan tradition, but I imagine that they are in a very similar way. And this idea and the karma, the worlds, the transmigration, reincarnation, and the karma are what was the worldview on which the philosophy and the psychological insights rested. They existed within this confines. So let me return to my pet topic of philosophical Buddhism versus traditional Buddhism. So in traditional Buddhism, looking at these worlds and contemplating the law of karma should give awakening to something. And if you're bright enough, if you're not a complete moron, you should kind of guess what it is. It's renunciation. I can look around these, even if a beautiful lady, goes by here, what does it really mean? Maybe we'll get married and make sensitive, tender love to each other. But then Yama, the Lord of Death, is gonna rip us apart. And we're just gonna, start cycling around, and maybe in the future she'll rape me and whatever. I'll be her servant in some horrible situation without democracy and liberal rights, and then the remainder of it. And this is gonna continue for forever. She'll be my favorite child, I'll be her least favorite child in the future. We're both gonna be birds or ants. I mean, the outlook is radically different. So when His Holiness the Dalai Lama walks around and sees different people, he has trained his whole life to view them as his mother sentient beings, as being interrelated with them continuously.
So therefore, the death is something like change of clothes. Clothes become dirty, old. Then time comes to change. Similarly, this body become too old or too old. Then time comes to change. Okay, so look death that way. Otherwise, you see, death is something mystery and dark. So you may get feeling of too much anxiety, fear like that. But if you know about the death, and I think either theistic religion believe God, or non-theistic religion believe yourself. You carry your life meaningful way, then there's a guarantee. So at the end, no regret. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's a different point of view, a different form of existence. In this instance, this life is like a dream. It is an important dream. You don't neglect this dream, but it is just a succession. It's just like walking through a train station or something. It's a completely different reality. And so this is the reality that traditional Buddhism is based upon. You have to renounce. You have to renounce aspects of this world. Even, out of your view right now, there's a Ford truck there. And I could have an attachment toward it, though I don't. Yep, just filming a Buddhist video here, sir. Just filming a Buddhist video. So in this schema, it makes sense to be a monk. It makes sense to meditate in caves for years, because you could potentially guide other beings out of this cycle, or at least make progress yourself. Then all of this makes sense. And when we talk about impermanence, like for example, in the context of one life, you could say, wow, Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy, what a great intersection of these. I can use these to enhance this one life. So when I lay down with my honey and I gently stroke her face or whatever, I can know, yes, this is impermanent, we're all gonna die. And that is the nature of it. I have to integrate ideas of impermanence and attachment into my life to see life for what it really is, to have a fuller definition of it, to not be as defined by my attachments. But does it really make sense to really dedicate most of your life to just reorienting yourself toward working with your mind? You could say, yes, there are unique things I can experience from sitting in a cave for 3 years. If I have a good teacher, I could really come out of that cave with a radically different experience that most people didn't have. On the other hand, that person going into a cave would miss out on aspects of the world that are also legitimate, even if they're based on attachment. Of course, Buddhists never said that there is no happiness in worldly existence. It's just that it is impermanent. But the nature of its impermanence changes as to whether you have one life to live, in which case you are guaranteed cessation. You're guaranteed cessation from the cycle of life because it never existed, as opposed to when you're not guaranteed cessation. So those things are things that secular Buddhists should wrestle with and formulate their worldview in a way that they can put their trainings and put their seminars and their retreats in accordance to that. But once you sort of throw away reincarnation and then embrace some vague sense of incoherent spirituality and enlightenment, then the formula, the purpose of your activities isn't clear. It's just not clear. Not my car.
Come a little closer, friend. I saw Adam leave the garden with an apple in his hand. I said, now you're out, what are you gonna do? Plant some crops and pray for rain, maybe raise a little king. I'm an orphan now and I'm only passing through. So are you, passing through, passing through. Sometimes happy, sometimes blue. Glad that I ran into you. Tell the people that you saw me passing through. I was with Washington at Valley Forge, shivering in the snow. I said, how come the men here suffer like they do? Men will suffer, men will fight, even die for what is right, even though they know they're only passing through. Passing through, passing through. Sometimes happy, sometimes blue. Glad that I ran into you. Tell the people that you saw me passing through. I was at Franklin Roosevelt's side on the night before he died. He said one world must come out of World War II. Not a fool. Yankee, Russian, white or tan, he said, a man is still a man. We're all on one road, we're only passing through.
So death and life, the distinguish between these two things is, as long as your consciousness, your mind, and your body, when they are together, it's called life. As long as when the mind and body separated, death. So that's the simple, right? Your mind and your body, when they're together, life. When they're separated, death. So that's the definition of death. It's the separation of your mind and body. As when your mind and body separate, it's called, it's die, finished. So here, I don't want to go very detailed, the detailed explanation in Buddhist concept in Vajrayana, Tantrayana philosophy. So I want to go more simple way. So here, usually, when we talk about body and mind, there is a gross level of body, there is a subtle level of body, there are very most subtle level of body. So they have put it into three: gross, subtle, and most subtle. Same the mind: gross, subtle, and most subtle, a very subtle mind. So the three things: very subtle mind and very subtle body, most subtle body, never ever separated, always be together. So the very subtle mind never death, it's always remain, and that the continuation of the mind is always be remain, never separated. So that's why when we talk about the death and life, which is we are talking about the gross level of mind and gross level of body, that's the only we're talking about. So here, when the mind separate from the body, usually the body is like a house who hosts the mind, the consciousness. The consciousness we host by our body. So when the body slowly getting older and it's getting weaker, finally that body can't host the mind. So then when they can't host the mind, that's why you lose the mind. That's why you call die. So when the mind and body is separated, it's not just second like that. Its separation is maybe first your mind is 100% depend or relying on the body, then 90%, then getting slower. So it's slowly your body is declining, your mind is separating from your body step by step, finally completely separated. So when the separation from the body from grows, then getting subtle. That's why we call the process of dying. So the process of dying, which means your mind is slowly separation. The process of separation, your mind from your body. The process of separation, mind from the body, is called process of dying. So from that point, usually there is a 25 gross level of object and so very complicated. So I go very simple. The structure of body, we have mainly 5 elements. First, earth element. So earth element, which makes our body solid, right? The solid body because of the earth element. Then second element is the water element. So 90% of our body is the liquids, the water. So the water element. Then the element of heat, fire element. So body, to function things, you see we have naturally heat in our body. That's because of the fire element. In order to live, to survive, in order to digest the food, in order to survive, the element of fire. It's very important. Then next thing is the wind element. So all those movement, the bodies, you can move here, there, we're moving, all those movement of element is the element of wind element. Then last element is consciousness, the mind element. So those the 5 element is this, who struck. I smell some burning. Did you smell? Okay. Where is burning? I don't know. Something I smell burning. But that's the element of this. Mainly the 5 element, right? That structure we should really understanding. That's the body, the function by those 5 elements. So when we separating from the consciousness, when we dying, each element's declining, it's dissolving, each element's a decline. So first, one of the gross element is the element of earth, the earth element. When the earth element dissolve, you see, that when people are dying, first their limbs getting thinner, the bodies shrink, limbs are getting thinner. Naturally, we all have like a nature freshness, the light, freshness. So when the element of earth element, when they're dissolving, that decline the body. You can see the body don't have that fresh, something light. It's declined. So that's your limbs are getting thinner, your body's shrinking, and your freshness of your bodies are also declining. That's the external sign of dissolving your earth element. So your eyes quite hot. Usually we move here, there, around here, there, still moving, but not that much, very slow. These are the sign, the external sign of earth element dissolving. So each element, when they dissolve, there's an external sign, there's an internal sign. External sign, which means everybody can see, doctors and everybody can see. But the internal sign, which means only the person, the dying person can see, nobody can see. That's why I call internal sign. So the external sign come that, then internal sign, the dying person, what he or she sees it's called the appearance of the mirage, like a mirage. So everything's not clear, you can't see very clear. Everything's like a shaky, like shaking, like a mirage. So seeing like a mirage. So many people fear, oh, everything's moving, or what's going on? Don't think it's created by your own mind because of the elements of the earth can't function, can't host the consciousness. So that's why when they're declining, that consciousness seeing something by their own mind, like a mirage. So that moment when you're thinking, when you see this, you feel like, oh, now my earth element is dissolving. So instead of fear or worry, you already know, oh, this is now earth, sign of earth element is dissolving. Then second, water element. When the water element dissolves, and what you're doing is the liquids, your mouth getting dry, lips are getting dry, mouth dry, you feel thirsty, the inside the eye, the liquids, are not there. You can't move your eye here, there. It's only in one place. Wherever they see, only stay that way. So not movement of eye. All the lips are drying, mouth, inside, everything's drying. That's the sign of water elements dissolving. External sign, everybody can see that. Now internal sign, the dying person, first it's mirage, like in shaking. You see something, but it's very shaky. Slowly, it's completely changed into like a smoke. That's called seeing as like a smoke, which means it's very smoky. Didn't see the clear image. It's very unclear image, like a mist. When you look at it, it's like very smoky, like a mist. And that's the sign of water element dissolving. Then next, fire element. So when the fire element dissolves, then slowly your body is getting cold. Usually we have heat, so it slowly is that diminish the heat of your bodies. When the heat of your body diminish, that's the sign of external sign of your fire element is now dissolving, finished. Everybody can see that. Then internal sign, the dying person, what they're seeing is called seeing like a fireflies. So it's like a scattering the sparks, sparkles, like little fires or something like everything's you seeing like so many like this fireflies. So that's the internal sign of dissolving your element of fire, it dissolving. So sometimes that heat, sometimes it's declined from toes to all the way to the upper body, from down to upper body. Sometimes from upper body to down body. It's going this way or that way. For the Tibetan, usually we call when they beginning your declining your heat from down to slowly going up, that means the good sign. It's you're going rebirth, good, higher rebirth. When they're beginning from head to go to the toes, so bad sign. You will go to lower rebirth. It's called your consciousness now try to journey from down part. So that's why it's a lower rebirth. It's a sign. Usually it's called like that. So whatever, but it's declining your heat from your body. That's the sign of your fire elements dissolve. Then the next, the air, wind element. When the wind element dissolves, then it will cease your breathing. So your breath no longer there. You completely finish breathing cease. And that's the external sign. Internal sign is the dying person, slowly they see like a orange color, sort of like the fire flame. When you burn something and dig a hole, the fire inside there, you don't see the fire, but when you look from there, you see the flame of those fire, that color, like an orange color. So that firefly first will sparkle everywhere, slowly it's changed and it's going it's like a very fire, like a fire flame. It's like a very bright orange, sort of like change. That's the sign, internal sign to dissolving your wind element. So usually, medical point of view, they say now he's dead, finished. Your brain is no longer functioning, your heart is not beating. So that's the way usually from medical perspective say, oh, now this guy is gone, finished, dead. But from Buddhist point of view, it's still not die. Still he is dying. His consciousness is still there, but it's getting more subtle level, but still there. So the consciousness level, there's also 4 levels to dissolving your consciousness. So consciousness first is called white appearance. Then second, red increase. Then third, black near enchantment. Then the last stage called clay light stage. So there's 4 different stages. First, white appearance. Then second, red increase. Then third, black near enchantment. Then the last stage called clay light stage. 4. Still they are dying. So your brain, whatever shut down or whatever, still their consciousness still remain. So your mind is not that much depend on your body. Still they are depend on your gross level of body, not but 100%. So each mind, each elements when they're dissolving, your mind, your consciousness getting subtle. That's why, external things, loud, whatever that you're not going to hear because all the sensory consciousness completely dissolve. So you don't see whatever there, whatever smells they put it, you can't smell, you can't hear. That's going much subtle level. So then, first white appearance. White appearance, which is, generally it is saying like when we're dying, Buddhists believe that one of the subtle consciousness is to remain in our central channels, in there. So when we dying, the source of the body, that we have today, the source of this body is come from 2 things. One is from father side of the eggs, the white eggs, and the mother side of red eggs or red drops. It's called white drops and red drops. This is the substantial causes of our body, right? The body come from there. Father side of white drops and mother side of red drops. These 2 joined together, this whole gross level of body come there. So in saying like the source of the white drops, of the source of essence of white drop is actually in the crown, in that level. So when we're dying, so that the drops come from the crown to settle through the central channel. When the drops going down through, you're mentally seeing like a appearance, white appearance, which like a full moon, the middle of the night without any cloud, like a full moon, like that kind of bright, white. You appear in your mind. You feel like just only, like a very bright appearance. There's no any external sign because you are only like a very subtle mind. So there's no external sign is same. But the internal that I am seeing is the white appearance. That's because of that drops coming down. From the mother side of the red drop, its source is in the belly. So from that point, when the red drops increase, it's going up. So when the red drops going up there through the central channel, the drops, one small drops going up, you appear like a red increase, which means you appear in your mind very like a bright red color, like a middle of the day, like the light of sun, the very bright red color. You're seeing that. That's called red increase. Then the black near attachment, which means eventually completely gone, and you feel like completely darkness. Your mind is completely gone. It's like a gone, which is the blind, complete darkness. It's called black near attachment. Then finally clear light. Slowly, then your minds become very clear, like early in the morning, without sun shining, without moon and star, just nature of light. You have some kind of very clear light, which means very bright mind. One of the subtlest consciousness. That's so many practitioners try to remain at that point. They try to remain, practice, meditate. So we do have, even in today, there are a number of great masters who remain in that stage for 7 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, at least 3 or 4 days. Many monks, and nuns, they remain on that stage as clay line. And that moment they focus on the meditation on emptiness, because your body is not like a function like usual. You are separate, look, feel, and there's nothing in it to grasp things. It's just luminous. The mind, very clear light and luminous there. So this is one of the best chance to understanding the ultimate reality of self. Where is the self now? Is this mind? Is not a self. There's nothing any other things. So it's a very good chance to understanding the ultimate reality of self and others. So they try to meditate, emptiness or any other what you usually they're doing. They keep that mind very virtuous and remain there as much as they can. Then finally, when the mind when the journey is separate from the body, then it's called death. So till that, what is the evidence? It's not dying. Maybe even 7 days, not talking, no eating, not looking. It's like a corpse, right? It's like a dead body. But how we prove this from the scientist point of view, how we prove this is still not dying is one of the like a miracle thing is that body never decomposed. So even in a hot weather, without use ice and injection, that body still never decompose, never smell, as saying remain as like usual. So that's very clear. It's I have my own experience in my teacher. When I finished my study, I then went to the Yume monastery. Then 2001 he passed away. Then just before he passed away, I came back to see him, and I have short vacation. That monastery is very strict. You are not allowed to go. But fortunately, that time His Holiness is going to give teaching in one different monastery. So monastery closed it. All the monks went to give. Then that's a very good chance to me to go to see my teacher. So I was there maybe with him 3, 4, or 5 days. Then last minute when he died, is whatever these things comes. But when he died, he remained in that clay-like state at least 5 or 6 days. So we never use any artist in India, very hot weather, South India. Nothing injection, nothing there. It's just leave us, we put a blanket, 1 or 2 blanket he usually wear there. Very hot weather, no air condition, we don't have these things there. But his body never decomposed, never smelled for 5 or 6 days. So that's from my own ICM, but we do have many like these kind of things today. So that's the one thing. Why it's not smelling? Why it's not decomposed? Because there's something, their body is still, there's something remaining working with their mind. Their subtle mind still there, something they're doing. Don't have any, for me, I don't know why not, but only the thing is there's something there. So when the consciousness leave the body, then you see after a few hours, then you can smell. It's like a meat, then it smell or decomposed and all those, you can see that. So till that, if they stay 20 days, 3 weeks, 1 week, still remain very fresh there. So that's the process of dying, So the many people, what you have to do is we have to know these things again, and mentally, psychologically, we just meditate these things again and again. That's the way we're going to do this. It's called preparation. So when the actual death comes, you have not that much fear. You already know these things will come there. So maybe if you meditate every day like that, maybe instead of fear of dying, maybe you will be very exciting. wow, it will become real. Till today, I'm visualizing. Now it comes real. What is real looks like. I really want to see that. Is to feel worry, depressed. You are very happy. You are enjoying, exciting to see those, process of dying. So your mind is fully under the control by yourself, no fear. So when you want to meditate, you have strength. You can able to concentrate. You can able to do whatever you want. As long as when your mind is full of fear, full of depressed, full of worry, there's no way to meditate. Nothing. Very difficult. And suffering with fearful life. And it's when the emotion, when the body is changed, you see so many things, you hear so many things which is not real, you feel like a crazy. People see like this guy is going crazy now. Because that's appearance. When they appear, they believe this is the truth. That's why they fear. That's why. As long as when you know this is an illusion, it's created by my mind, it's not reality, then these things not bother you. You're still able to concentrate on your own things. So process of dying, it's very important to know that. But in order to practice this first preparation of that, death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. At the time of death, nobody, which we have to put it is, we have to put all your attachment, or object of attachment, where you more attach, these are the things you should think. At the time of death, this will not going to help me. So you should think again and again. That helps you to reduce your attachment. So you getting more freedom. As long as when you have 100 different attachment, you lose 100 different freedom. So your life is very miserable, no free. Because your mind is stuck. If I attach to there, one part of my mind is stuck on there. Always my mind something. When these things change, it's changing my here, bother me. So that's why as long as if you are 100 different object of attachment, you're losing 100 different freedom.